Integrity is a liability. My son's father-in-law laughed, toasting to my ruin with a glass of champagne he'd spiked himself. He thought the old contractor was just a crumbling relic, a useful idiot to be stripped for parts and discarded. He didn't realize that when you build a skyscraper with your own hands, you know exactly which beam to pull to bring the whole damn thing crashing down on their heads. My name is Michael, and for 40 years I built this city. But tonight I was here to bury a dynasty. If you're listening to this, hit subscribe and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. It helps to know I'm not just shouting into the void. Let me back up to the moment the silence in my house became too loud to ignore. The silence in my house wasn't empty. It was structural. It was the kind of silence that settles into the drywall and adds a measurable load to the floorboards, a dead weight that no architect accounts for. I stood in the center of the master bedroom, listening to the house breathe. I knew every groan of the joists, every tick of the cooling ductwork. I had built this place 30 years ago, pouring the foundation with my own hands, ensuring the rebar was tied with surgical precision. It was built to withstand hurricanes, earthquakes, and time, but it wasn't built to withstand the hollowness of a man living alone. I stood before the full-length hallway mirror. The reflection staring back was a stranger wearing my face. My tuxedo felt like a containment vessel, stiff and unforgiving. The collar dug into my neck, a starch-stiffened noose. For 40 years I didn't speak in words. I spoke in measurements. Cubic yards of concrete, board feet of lumber, sigh of a compressive strength. I built Miller & Sons Construction from a rusted Ford pickup and a bag of hand-me-down tools. I made it the bedrock of this county. When people walked into a Miller building, they felt safe, even if they didn't know why. They felt the integrity in the walls, but looking at the gray-haired man and the glass shoulders slightly slumped, eyes rimmed with red, I saw a building that had been condemned. The on suns on the side of my trucks had been alive for 3 years. It was just paint now, a faded promise. I was a builder with nothing left to build, and worse, I was a father who had let the most important structure of his life collapse. I walked down the hallway, my dress shoes clicking on the hardwood with an aggressive rhythmic tap that echoed too loudly. The house felt cold despite the thermostat reading 70 degrees. It was the chill of a place that hasn't heard laughter in 1,000 days. I entered the kitchen. It was spotless, sterile. On the formatia counter, a material I insisted on keeping because it was durable, honest, lay the invitation. It was an object of offense, heavy, cream-colored cardstock that felt thick and oily like money. The lettering was gold leaf embossed so deep you could feel the ridges with your thumb. It sneered at my practical kitchen, the union of Miller Construction and the Sterling Group, a celebration of future and family. I picked it up. It felt heavier than a brick. Family, I scoffed. The word hung in the empty room, suspended in the dust motes dancing in the late afternoon light. It tasted like ash. It tasted like failure. I looked at the empty chair at the breakfast table. That was where Martha used to sit. She was the rebar in my concrete unseen, but holding the tensile strength of our entire life together. When she passed, the cracks didn't appear immediately. It was a slow fatigue, and without her there to bridge the gap. Lucas and I had drifted to opposite sides of a widening canyon. My son, Lucas. He was the one who sent this expensive piece of paper. I closed my eyes, leaning my weight against the counter. The memory was vivid, projected against the back of my eyelids. Lucas at age 10. We were on the job site of the community center. He was sitting on the tailgate of my truck, legs dangling, eating a ham sandwich with grease on his chin. He wasn't playing with trucks. He was drawing blueprints on napkins. "Look, Dad," he'd said, showing me a drawing of a skyscraper that defied physics. "This one touches the clouds." He had my eyes, builder's eyes, always assessing, always measuring. But he had Martha's heart, soft, porous, capable of absorbing too much pain until it became heavy. 3 years ago he married Jessica Sterling. That was the day the erosion began. That was the day the foundation shifted. I didn't lose him in a tragedy. I lost him to a signature on a marriage license. The Sterlings were not builders. They were owners. There is a fundamental difference in the soul of a man who creates and a man who acquires. The Sterlings were a dynasty of real estate vultures. They didn't see a forest. They saw a parking lot yield. They didn't see a handshake. They saw a potential liability lawsuit. When Lucas met Jessica, he changed. It wasn't a sudden structural failure. It was substatus. It was water wearing down stone, drop by drop. First, the boots disappeared, replaced by loafers. Then the flannel was swapped for Italian silk. He stopped coming to the Sunday barbecues, leaving me with too much brisket and too much silence. Then he stopped returning my calls. He didn't just drift away. He was pulled, tension, sheer force. The Sterlings exerted a gravitational pull that my simple life couldn't compete with. I remembered the last time he looked me in the eye. It was a rainy afternoon, the sky the color of wet laylet. He stood in my foyer, not taking off his coat. "Dad," he had said, his voice flat, stripped of its usual warmth. "You're thinking too small. You're obsessed with integrity. The Sterling Group can take us to the next level. You need to let go. Integrity is what keeps the roof up, Lucas," I had argued. "Leverage is what buys the roof, Dad." I thought I was losing him to ambition. I thought he was just hungry. I didn't realize I was losing him to a cage. The phone rang. The sound shattered the silence like a hammer striking plate glass. It was the landline, a beige wall-mounted relic that I refused to disconnect. It screamed through the kitchen, jarring and insistent. I stared at it. Who calls a landline anymore? Telemarketers? Machines? Or ghosts? I picked up the receiver. The plastic felt cool and greasy. "Hello, Mike?" The voice was low, hurried, rasping with the sound of a man who had smoked 2 packs a day for 40 years. It was Frank, my oldest friend, my former foreman. Frank was 70, a man carved out of granite and bad decisions. He had retired 2 years ago, claiming his knees were shot. But I knew Frank. He couldn't sit still. He still had eyes on every job site in the city. He knew which inspectors took bribes and which suppliers watered down their cement. "You leaving for the gala?" Frank asked. There was no pleasantry. No "how are you?" Just walking out the door, I said, checking my watch. "Why? Don't go, Mike." Its tone sent a chill down my spine, colder than the drafty hallway. It wasn't advice. It was a warning. "What are you talking about, Frank?" I gripped the phone tighter. "I was at the municipal archives today," Frank said. He sounded out of breath, like he was walking fast. Or maybe running. "I pulled the permits for the Sterling projects. The seaside complex. The high-rises. The ones they want to merge our assets into. And they're fake, Mike." The words hung in the air. Fake. In our world, that was the ultimate sin. A fake permit meant hidden dangers. It meant unchecked loads. "The soil samples?" I asked, my voice dropping. "Fabricated," Frank hissed. "The seismic reports, copied from a project in 1998. The load-bearing inspections, signed by a guy who's been dead for 6 years. The room seemed to tilt. The structural integrity of my reality groaned. "Fake?" I repeated, the word feeling foreign. "Everything," Frank said. "If you sign that merger tonight, they aren't just taking your company, Mike. They're using your clean assets, your reputation, your 40 years of honest work to underpin a decade of fraud. They need your solid foundation to cover their sinkhole." I looked at the invitation on the counter, a celebration of future and family. It wasn't a celebration. It was a demolition. "Once the ink is dry," Frank whispered, the static on the line rising, "they'll dump the liability on you."
And Lucas.
The name hit me harder than the fraud. "Does Lucas know?" I asked, my throat tight. "He has to, Mike. He's the VP. He signs off on the projection sheets." I closed my eyes. The image of the 10-year-old boy with the blueprint dissolved, replaced by the stranger in the Italian suit. "They'll bankrupt you to save themselves," Frank continued. "But it's worse for Lucas. If those buildings fail, if people get hurt, he goes to prison. Or worse. My son wasn't just walking into a business deal. He was walking into a fire." "Thanks, Frank," I said. My voice was low, dangerous. It was the voice I used when a subcontractor tried to cut corners on safety gear. "Watch your back," Frank warned. "These people aren't just crooks. They're desperate. The market is turning. A desperate man with $1 billion is a dangerous thing. They've got nothing to lose but their power, and they'll kill to keep it." I hung up. The click was final. I looked at the photo on the mantelpiece. Me and Lucas, 10 years ago. Fishing trip. He was smiling then, a real smile, crinkling the corners of his eyes, not the practiced, tight-lipped expression he wore in the society pages now. I touched the glass of the frame. I grabbed my keys from the hook. They jangled, the sound of movement, of action. I wasn't just going to a party anymore. I wasn't going to shake hands and drink warm champagne and pretend to be happy about my obsolescence. I was going on a rescue mission. I checked my pocket. I had my folding knife, old habits from the job site. I patted my chest. I didn't know the enemy was already inside the gates. I didn't know how deep the rot went. But I knew one thing. I built things to last, and I wasn't going to let them tear my son down. I opened the front door and stepped out into the night. The air was cool, smelling of rain and asphalt. The silence was gone. Now there was only the sound of the coming storm. The drive to the coast was a journey into the throat of the beast. The highway wound like a black ribbon cut into the granite cliffs, suspended between the dark, churning expanse of the Pacific and the towering rock faces. Rain lashed against the windshield, the wipers of my 10-year-old sedan fighting a losing battle against the deluge. The Sterling estate sat on the very edge of the continent, a sprawling monstrosity of glass, steel, and hubris. It didn't look like a home. It looked like a command center. It cantilevered over the cliffs with an arrogance that made my engineer's brain itch. It defied gravity not with grace, but with brute force. Floodlights cut through the mist, illuminating the crashing waves below, a violent, white-capped reminder of what happens when you build too close to the edge. Security guards with earpieces and Ely slickers lined the driveway, their flashlights cutting arcs through the rain. They looked less like private security and more like paramilitaries. I pulled my sedan up to the valley stand. The engine ticked loudly, a metallic heat ping that sounded jagged against the smooth purr of the idling luxury fleet. I parked between a silver Bentley and a matte black Maserati. My car was a tool, utilitarian, reliable, scarred. These other cars were jewelry. The valet, a young kid with slick back hair and a face that had never known a day of manual labor, looked at my car with open disdain. He hesitated before opening my door, as if the rust on the rocker panel might be contagious. "Key?" he demanded, hand out, palm flat. He didn't make eye contact. To him I was the help, or a mistake. I stepped out, the cool sea air hitting my face. I looked him in the eye until he flinched. "Keep it close," I told him, tossing the keys hard. He fumbled, catching them against his chest. "Top of the deck. I might need to leave in a hurry." He rolled his eyes, dangling the keychain by a single finger. "We usually parked up older models in the lower lot, sir." "For aesthetics, park it where I can see it," I said, stepping into his personal space. "Or I'll park it in the lobby." He swallowed. He didn't know who I was. He didn't know that I could look at the canopy above his head and tell him exactly which bolt was carrying the shear load. He didn't know what I was capable of dismantling. I walked up the massive stone steps. They were marble, slippery in the rain. A code violation waiting to happen. The ballroom was a sensory assault. It was a sea of black ties and designer gowns, a shifting tide of fabric and flesh. The air smelled of expensive perfume, ozone, and old money. A string quartet played in the corner, the music polite, lifeless, and perfectly tuned to fade into the background. I straightened my back. The tuxedo still felt like a cage, but I forced my shoulders down. I was a builder. I created the floors these people walked on. I poured the concrete that held their penthouses in the sky. I wouldn't let them make me feel small. But as I moved through the room, I felt the gaze of the house upon me. The vaulted ceilings seemed to press down. The shadows in the corners felt sharp. "Michael, you made it." The voice was like oil sliding over velvet. Smooth, viscous. Edward Sterling, Jessica's father. He glided toward me through the crowd, parting the guests like a ship cutting through ice. He looked like a man who had been preserved in chemicals. Skin too tight, tan too even, teeth too white. He wore a tuxedo that cost more than my first house, the lapels sharp enough to cut. "Hello, Edward," I said. I kept my hands at my sides. I didn't offer a handshake. I knew where his hands had been, in the pockets of city councilmen, and on the handles of backroom doors. Exciting night, Edward beamed, spreading his arms as if to embrace the room. He didn't seem to notice the snub, or perhaps he deemed it beneath him to acknowledge the end of an era and the beginning of an empire. The merger is finally happening. Jessica has organized everything, he added, his eyes scanning the room over my shoulder. She's very thorough. I hear you're very thorough with your permits, too, I said. I dropped the sentence like a plumb line, waiting to see if the wall was straight. I watched his face closely. I looked for the micro-expressions, the twitch of a lip, the flare of a nostril. Edward's smile didn't waver. It was painted on, but his left eye twitched. Just once, a spasm of the nerve. Efficiency, Michael, he said smoothly, leaning in slightly. The smell of his cologne, musk and antiseptic, was overpowering. That's the key to modern business. We don't get bogged down in red tape. We innovate. We accelerate. Red tape keeps buildings from falling down on people's heads. Edward, it keeps the ground from swallowing the foundation. Edward chuckled, a dry, rattling sound. Details. He waved a manicured hand. You always were a purist, Michael. A relic of a simpler time. Where is Lucas? You must be dying to see him. I am, I said, my voice hardening. Where is he? Oh, around. Hobnobbing. He's very popular tonight. He is the face of the future, after all. Edward patted my shoulder. His hand felt heavy, heavy and cold, like a shackle. Enjoy the champagne, Michael. It's a special vintage. We saved it just for you. He walked away, sliding back into the crowd. But he didn't stop watching me. I could feel his eyes on my back, cold and calculating. He was assessing me, looking for cracks. I moved deeper into the room, navigating the labyrinth of round tables and ice sculptures. I needed to find my son. I needed to look him in the eye and see if there was anything left of the boy who drew on napkins. I needed to know if he was part of the con or just a casualty of it. I saw a woman waving at me near the buffet, tucked away behind a towering display of shrimp. It was Sarah Jenkins. Sarah had been my bookkeeper for 20 years. She knew the cost of every nail, every board, every hour of labor. She was family, or she used to be. Lucas fired her 6 months ago. He sent an email. He said we needed modern accounting, which I now realized meant creative accounting. She looked tired. Her hair was grayer than I remembered. She was wearing a black catering uniform, an apron tied around her waist. She looked small and out of place among the silk and diamonds. Sarah, I said, stepping into the alcove, what are you doing here? I'm working catering, she whispered, wiping her hands on her apron. She pointed to the tray of empty glasses. I needed the money, Mike. The pension, it hasn't been paying out right. My heart broke a little. Another crack in the foundation. I'm sorry, Sarah, I said, reaching for her hand. It was rough, hard-working. I didn't know. It's not your fault, she said quickly, pulling her hand away as a supervisor glared from across the room. Mike, listen to me. Be careful. Why? What have you heard? I heard them talking in the kitchen. The staff, the private security. She leaned in, her voice barely a tremor. They said, tonight is the clean break. Clean break? That's what Jessica calls it. I heard her on the phone in the pantry. She said after tonight, the old wood gets burned to make room for the steel. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. The fear in her face was genuine. You're the old wood, Mike. I nodded slowly. The metaphor was apt. Old wood is dry. It burns fast. They were planning to torch me. I squeezed Sarah's shoulder. Go home, Sarah. Get out of here. If things go wrong, I don't want you in the blast radius. But go, now. Take the back exit. She nodded, terrified, and slipped through the kitchen swing doors. I turned back to the room. The music seemed louder now, discordant. And then I saw him. Lucas was standing near the terrace doors, framed by the dark storm outside. He was talking to a tall man with silver hair. Senator Vance, the chairman of the zoning committee. Of course, Jessica was clinging to Lucas's arm like a vine, a parasitic ivy that chokes the host tree. She was beautiful, terrifyingly so. She wore a dress of emerald green satin that hugged her like a second skin. Her diamond necklace glittered like shards of ice. She was radiant, sharp, and lethal. I walked toward them. When Lucas saw me, he froze. "Dad," he said. The word came out like a breath, punched out of him. He stepped away from Jessica, or tried to. She held on tight. Her nails, painted a deep blood red, dug into the fabric of his suit jacket. I could see the tension in her knuckles. "Hello, Michael," Jessica purred. Her smile didn't reach her eyes. Her eyes were flat, dead things. "You look sturdy, as always. Lucas, can I speak to you?" I asked, ignoring her. "Alone? We don't have secrets," Jessica said sharply, her voice dropping an octave. "We're partners, husband and wife. Anything you have to say, you can say to me. I'm talking to my son." I growled. My voice carried the weight of a foreman shouting over a jackhammer. It was a command, not a request. Heads turned nearby. A waiter paused. Lucas looked at Jessica. A silent communication passed between them. It was rapid, coded, fear, warning, permission. "Just a minute, Jess. Please," Lucas said. He sounded exhausted. She narrowed her eyes, assessing the risk of a scene versus the risk of leaving him alone with me. "1 minute," she said. "The investors are waiting for the toast." "Don't be long." She let go of his arm. But she leaned in close to his ear, her lips brushing his lobe. "Remember the plan," she whispered. She didn't care if I heard. It was a threat. Lucas walked with me to a quiet corner near the heavy Levitt curtains that obscured the storm. He looked terrible. From a distance he looked like a sterling. Up close I could see the truth. The gray in his skin, the tremor in his hands, the way his tie seemed too tight. He looked like a building that had been stripped of its supports, held up only by the facade. "They're faking the permits, Lucas," I said. I didn't dance around it. I cut straight to the bone. Frank found the records. The merger is a setup. They are using Miller Construction to bury their fraud. Lucas didn't gasp. He didn't deny it. He looked down at his polished shoes, staring at his reflection in the patent leather. "I know," he whispered. The admission hit me like a physical blow, sledgehammer to the chest. "You know?" I asked, my voice rising. "You know, and you're still here. You're letting them." "I can't stop them, Dad," he whispered. His voice trembled. "You don't understand the scope of it. What leverage do they have?" I demanded. "Money? Reputation? Is that what you sold your soul for?" "Not money," Lucas said. He looked up. I saw a flash of pure, unadulterated desperation in his eyes. It was the look of a trapped animal, gnawing off its own leg. "Dad, listen to me. Tonight, just play along. Please." "Play along?" I stared at him. "You want me to sign my life away? To be their scapegoat? Whatever happens, don't cause a scene," he hissed, glancing back at Jessica, who was watching us like a hawk from across the room. "Don't fight them. Not yet." "Why?" "So they can strip my company and kick me to the curb. So I can save you," he whispered. I stared at him. "Save me? You're the one drowning, Lucas." "I am giving you a choice, Lucas," I said, grabbing his arm. It felt thin. "Walk out that door with me. Right now. Leave the car. Leave the suit. We go to the FBI. We burn it down ourselves." Lucas shook his head. Tears welled in his eyes, shimmering under the chandelier lights. "I can't leave. If I leave, she destroys everything. She destroys you. You have to trust me," he begged. "Trust is earned, Lucas. And right now, you're standing on the wrong side of the caution tape." "Lucas!" Jessica's voice cut through the air like a whip. "The toast. We need you." Lucas flinched. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my bicep, squeezing it hard, desperately. "Trust me. One last time. Please." He leaned in close, his breath smelling of mint and fear. "Watch her hands," he whispered. He walked away before I could answer. "Watch her hands?" I stood alone in the corner. My heart was hammering against my ribs. The room felt hotter, the air thinner. I needed more information. I couldn't just trust a whisper from a man who had lied to me for 3 years. I made my way to the buffet tables moving along the perimeter. I pretended to admire the ice sculptures, swans melting slowly, dripping water onto the linen. I saw a man sitting at the bar, slumped over a gin and tonic. It was George Holloway, my old corporate lawyer, the man who had drawn up my first incorporation papers in 1985. He had retired last year, or so I thought. He looked disheveled. His tie was loose. "George," I said, sliding onto the stool next to him. He jumped, spilling gin on his cuff. He looked at me with bleary, bloodshot eyes. "Michael," George slurred. He looked terrified to see me. "You shouldn't be here. You really shouldn't be here." "Why does everyone keep saying that?" I asked, signaling the bartender for a water. "George, what's going on?" "The addendum," George whispered. He looked over his shoulder, scanning for eavesdroppers. I saw the draft on Edward's desk. I wasn't supposed to see it. "What addendum?" "The merger agreement," George said, his voice dropping to a rasp. "It has a medical competency clause. A new one, hidden in Section 4C. "What does that mean?" George leaned in. His breath smelled of expensive gin and rye. "It means that if the primary shareholder suffers a sudden medical episode, resulting in confusion or cognitive decline during the transition period." He paused, taking a gulp of gin. "Go on, George." "Full power of attorney transfers immediately to the next of kin." "To Lucas. And since Lucas is married to Jessica, they control everything," George nodded sadly. "Your money, your company, your assets. And you. They can institutionalize you, Michael. They can lock you away in a home and claim you've lost your mind. They don't want a partner, Michael," George said, weeping silently now. "They want a puppet, and they want a victim. The trap wasn't just financial. It was existential. They were going to steal my mind." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. It started in my stomach and radiated out to my fingertips. I looked across the room. I saw a man watching me from near the kitchen doors. He was tall, thin, cadaverous, wearing wire-rimmed glasses and a suit that was too clinical, too gray. "Who is that?" I asked George, tilting my head. George squinted, wiping his eyes. "That's Dr. Evans," George whispered, shrinking back into his drink. "He's on the Sterling payroll. He signs the papers no other doctor will touch. He's the one who committed Edward's first wife." It all clicked. The picture resolved into high-definition horror. The medical episode. The doctor on standby. The special vintage champagne Edward mentioned. They were going to drug me. They were going to make me look crazy, violent, or senile in front of 500 witnesses. Then Dr. Evans would step in, shake his head sadly, and sign the paper, and I would be gone. Erased, I turned to leave the room. I had to get out. I needed to find a phone that wasn't monitored. I needed to call the police myself. I walked toward the main exit, moving fast. A shadow detached itself from the wall. A large security guard stepped in my path. His name tag read Bruno. He looked like a wall of meat, his neck thicker than my thigh. "Restrooms are that way, sir," Bruno said. His voice was a low rumble. He blocked the exit with his body. He didn't move an inch. "I'm going to my car," I said. "I forgot my medication." "Valet is closed during the speeches, sir," Bruno said. "Mr. Sterling's orders?" "No one enters or leaves until the toast is complete." "I have my keys," I said, my hand closing around the metal in my pocket. "I'm leaving." I tried to step around him. He moved to block me again, faster than a man his size should move. His hand dropped to his belt, brushing against a taser. "Please return to the ballroom, Mr. Miller." He wasn't asking. He was ordering. I looked around. 2 other guards were watching from the perimeter. I was trapped. If I fought them, I would cause a scene. "Look at the old man," they would say. "He's violent, unstable, confused." It would play right into their narrative. It would give them the excuse they needed to call Dr. Evans over. I had to stay. I had to walk into the fire. I turned back to the glittering room. It felt like the inside of a coffin, lined with velvet. I looked across the sea of faces. Lucas was back at Jessica's side at the head table. He looked like a prisoner on death row, waiting for the executioner. But his eyes were scanning the table, scanning the glasses. "Watch your hands." I took a deep breath. I adjusted my tie, and I walked toward the table where my execution awaited. The ballroom lights dimmed. a slow, suffocating fade that drew the air out of the room. A single piercing spotlight cut through the darkness, pinning the head table against the back wall like a specimen on a slide. "Ladies and gentlemen," Edward Sterling's voice boomed over the surround sound system, distorted slightly by the gain. It wasn't a voice of welcome. It was the voice of a ringmaster. "Please, take your seats. It is time for the unity toast." I was herded really by Bruno toward the main table. It was elevated on a dais, a foot above the rest of the floor. A subtle psychological trick. Make them look up to us. Make us the gods on Olympus. I climbed the 3 small steps. My knees popped, a sound only I could hear. I was seated at the far end. Edward sat in the center, the keystone of the arch. Lucas and Jessica were to my left. Directly behind us, at a smaller, shadowed table near the service entrance, sat Dr. Evans. He had taken off his glasses and was polishing them with a microfiber cloth, his eyes pale and naked, watching my back. I sat down. The chair was a gold-painted Chiavari chair, flimsy and uncomfortable. It felt less like a seat of honor and more like an electric chair waiting for the switch. "A special vintage," Edward announced to the room, tapping his microphone, "for a special union. Tonight, we merge the legacy of Miller with the vision of Sterling." A waiter appeared from the shadows. He moved with the silent efficiency of a funeral director. He carried a silver tray, condensation, clinging to its rim. He placed a glass of champagne in front of Edward. The crystal chimed against the coaster. Then Jessica. Then Lucas. Then he came to me. The waiter didn't look at me. He placed a tall, fluted crystal glass in front of me. The liquid inside was pale gold, lively with carbonation. The bubbles raced to the surface in a frantic, upward sprint. I stared at the glass. My engineering brain began to calculate variables. Was it in there already? Had the waiter been compromised? Or was the delivery method more personal? I looked at Jessica. She was fidgeting. For a woman who was usually as still as a statue, the movement was jarring. She was playing with her clutch, a small, silver sequined bag that looked like chainmail. Her fingers were drumming on the clasp. Tap, tap. She pulled out a small, lace handkerchief, dabbing at her dry forehead. "Oh!" Jessica cried out suddenly. The sound was sharp, theatrical. She dropped the heavy silver clutch onto the table. Thud. It hit the tablecloth with the weight of a stone. It rattled the silverware. A water glass tipped over near Edward, spilling ice onto the linen. "Clumsy me," she laughed. A high, brittle sound that grated on my nerves. Edward turned to look at her, feigning irritation. "Jessica, really, be careful." The entire room's attention snapped to the sound. The guests, the cameras, the waiters, everyone looked at the bag. It was a basic human reflex. A sudden noise, a sudden movement. Even Lucas turned his head toward the spill. But I obeyed my son. I didn't look at the distraction. I locked my eyes on the only thing that mattered. I watched her hands. I didn't look at the bag. I didn't look at the water glass. I looked at her right hand. While the world stared at the clutch, her right hand moved. It didn't move with panic. It moved with the precision of a surgeon. It was fast. Blur fast. Like a viper striking from the grass. She held a small vial, no bigger than a tube of lipstick, concealed in her palm. It was glass, clear with a rubber stopper. She reached for the crystal water pitchers sitting between our place settings. "Let me help you with some water, Michael," she said. Her voice was sweet, dripping with false concern. "You look flushed." As her hand passed over the rim of my champagne flute to reach the pitcher, her thumb flicked the cap off the vial. She didn't pour it. She tipped her wrist, a micro-movement of maybe 10 degrees. A tiny stream of clear, viscous liquid shot from the vial and vanished into the champagne. It happened in less than a second. The liquid hit the bubbles and dissolved instantly. No splash, no color change, just a slight disruption in the carbonation, quickly corrected by the rising gas. She grabbed the water pitcher handle, completing the motion as if that had been her intent all along. She poured water into my eyeglass. She capped the vial with her thumb and slid it back into her sleeve. She sat back, smoothing her dress. She smiled at me. It was the smile of an angel painted on a tombstone. There, she said, pushing the water toward me. Hydration is important at your age. We wouldn't want you getting confused. She hadn't just poured water. She had poured my coffin. I stared at the champagne. It was death in a glass, or madness, scopolamine, a synthetic hallucinogen, a heavy sedative. If I drank it, the chemistry would take over. My brain, the tool I had used to build skyscrapers and bridges, would turn to mush. I would become suggestible. I would sign the papers. I would drool on my tuxedo, and Dr. Evans would be right there to catch me. I looked at Lucas. He was staring at the glass, too. He hadn't seen the drop. He had been looking at the bag like everyone else. But he knew his wife. His face was pale, beads of sweat standing out on his upper lip. His knuckles were white as he gripped the tablecloth, bunching the fabric. He saw the stillness of the liquid. He saw the way I was looking at it. He tapped his finger on the table. Tap, tap, tap. A toast, a salad, raising his glass high. The spotlight caught the crystal, making it fracture into a rainbow of light. To Miller and Sterling, to the future, to the future, to the future. The crowd roared back, 1,000 voices merging into a wall of sound. I didn't move. Drink up, Michael, Edward urged, leaning toward me. His eyes were cold, hard flints. Don't be rude. The cameras are rolling. I could feel the lenses zooming in, the red tally lights of the recording equipment blinking like predatory eyes. I'm not thirsty, I said, my voice rough. It's bad luck not to toast, Jessica said. Her voice held a dangerous edge, like a razor blade hidden in an apple. It suggests bad faith. Unless you don't support the family, Jessica challenged, raising an eyebrow. Unless you're having second thoughts about your legacy, the pressure was mounting. The silence at the head table was growing heavy, awkward. The guests were starting to whisper. Look at the old man. He's freezing up. He's confused. Suddenly, Lucas stood up. He didn't stand up gracefully. He shoved his chair back with a violent screech of wood against wood. Scrape. He swayed on his feet. He looked unkempt, his tie slightly askew. Wait, he shouted. His words were slurred, thick. Wait, wait, wait. Lucas, sit down, Jessica hissed, her smile vanishing. She grabbed the hem of his jacket, yanking it. You're making a scene. No, I want to honor my father. Lucas slurred, pulling away from her grip. He stumbled. He looked like a man who had been at the open bar for 3 hours. He lurched toward me. He looked like a mess, a disappointment. My dad, the builder, he mumbled, waving a hand vaguely in my direction. The man who built it all. He reached for my glass. Here, Dad. Let me fix your napkin. It's crooked. Everything has to be level, right? He leaned over me, placing one hand on my shoulder to steady himself. His grip was surprisingly firm. His broad back blocked Jessica and Edward's view of the table. For a split second, we were in a private shadow. Switch, he whispered. It was barely a breath, a ghost of a word. In a blur of motion, he grabbed my poisoned glass with his left hand, and he grabbed his own clean glass, which he had brought with him, with his right. He crossed his arms in a clumsy, drunken gesture, as if losing his balance. It was a magician's trick, a sleight of hand, performed by a desperate son. Clink. The glasses touched. He set the clean glass down in front of me, but he didn't keep the poisoned one. He didn't drink it himself. That would be suicide. He stumbled again, pivoting on his heel. He lurched toward Jessica, who was now standing, her face a mask of fury and embarrassment. And to my lovely wife, Lucas said, swaying dangerously close to her. The woman behind the man. He set the poisoned glass down in front of her, and in the same fluid, chaotic motion, he picked up her glass, the one she had been drinking from, the one stained with her lipstick, and took it for himself. He had rotated the glasses, a shell game played with lethal stakes. I had Lucas's glass. Lucas had Jessica's glass. Jessica had the poison. He sat back down heavily, knocking into the table. Sorry, Lucas muttered, rubbing his face. Lost my balance. Floors are uneven. Jessica looked at him with pure disgust. "You're drunk," she hissed. "You're embarrassing me in front of the board." "Just a toast, my love," Lucas said. He looked up at her. His eyes were suddenly sharp, clear. The drunkenness evaporated for a fraction of a second, revealing the steel beneath. "Drink to our success, Jessica. Drink to the clean break." Edward looked annoyed, checking his watch. "Come on, everyone. Enough dramatics. Drink up." Jessica rolled her eyes. She was angry, distracted by Lucas's behavior. She didn't notice the subtle shift in liquid levels. She didn't notice the lack of lipstick on the rim of the glass now sitting before her. She lifted the glass she had spiked for me. "To success," she said coldly, staring at me. She brought the rim to her lips. I watched her throat. She tilted her head back. She took a long, deep swallow, draining half the flute in one go to hide her frustration. I watched the muscles in her neck contract. I watched the poison enter her system. I lifted my glass. My hand was steady now. I sipped. It was cool, crisp, clean. Lucas drank from Jessica's glass. He lowered it to the table. He didn't look at his wife. He looked at me. He gave a single, imperceptible nod. A foreman signaling the crane operator. Load secured. I set my glass down. "The family," I whispered. Now we just had to wait for the walls to come tumbling down. 5 minutes. That's how long it took for the chemicals to navigate the bloodstream and breach the fortress of Jessica's mind. The band struck up a jazz standard, something upbeat and brassy to cover the awkwardness of the toast. Waiters materialized from the gloom, placing plates of arugula and shaved fennel before us. The salad looked like yard trimmings. I stared at my fork, counting the seconds in my head. 1 Mississippi. 2 Mississippi. Jessica was typing furiously on her phone, probably texting her lawyer or her publicist. Then she stopped. Her thumbs hovered over the screen. She frowned, a small crinkle appearing between her perfectly shaped eyebrows. She tapped the screen, harder this time. Then she shook the phone, as if the device itself were broken. She blinked rapidly, like a camera shutter malfunctioning. She reached up and rubbed her temples, smudging her flawless foundation. "Is it hot in here?" she asked. Her voice was too loud, cutting through the ambient chatter of the nearest tables. "Waiter, tell them to turn down the heat. It's stifling. The temperature is controlled, Jessica," Edward said, slicing a fig with surgical precision. "It's 72 degrees. Relax. You're just winding down from the stress." "I'm not stressed," she snapped. She pulled at the collar of her dress. "The air, it's thick. It tastes like copper." "No, it's the lights," Jessica said, looking up. She stared directly into the crystal chandelier hanging above us. To anyone else, it was a static fixture. To her, it must have been alive. "Why are they pulsing?" she demanded, pointing a trembling finger. "They're breathing, in and out, like a lung." She stood up. It wasn't a graceful rise, it was a lurch. She swayed, her equilibrium shattering. She grabbed the tablecloth for support, her nails clawing into the linen. Crash! Her plate slid off the table, shattering on the marble floor. Silverware clattered like shrapnel. "Jessica?" Edward asked, dropping his fork. His face went from annoyance to alarm. "Are you ill?" "I'm not ill," she snapped, wheeling on him. Her eyes were wild. The pupils had dilated so wide they swallowed the irises. They were black holes, absorbing all the light in the room. I'm lucid," she shouted. "I can see everything. The lines. I can see the lines connecting everything." She turned and pointed a finger at me. "He knows," she screamed. The music stopped abruptly. The saxophonist trailed off with a squeak. The room went silent, save for the hum of the air conditioning and the heavy breathing of a woman losing her mind. "He knows about the Cayman accounts," Jessica shouted. She wasn't whispering conspiratorially anymore. The drug had stripped away her filter, her inhibition, her self-preservation. It was a chemical demolition of her social facade. "He knows we're bankrupt," she shrieked, laughing, hysterically. "He knows the liquidity is gone. It's all vapor, it's all smoke." Senator Vance, sitting 2 tables away, stood up, looking for an exit. Jessica saw him. "Daddy, look!" She pointed at the senator. He knows we stole the pension fund to pay the senator's bribe. A collective gasp went through the room. It sucked the air out of the ballroom. Senator Vance dropped his napkin. His face went the color of cottage cheese. Edward stood up so fast his chair toppled over. He was pale as a sheet, sweat instantly breaking out on his forehead. She's having a reaction, Edward bellowed to the crowd, waving his arms frantically. An allergic reaction? Security! Get the car! Get Dr. Evans! Dr. Evans was already moving, rushing toward the stage with a syringe kit in his hand. No, Jessica shoved a waiter who tried to steady her. She was surprisingly strong, fueled by adrenaline and psychosis. She climbed onto her chair, towering over the table. I don't want the car. I want the money, she screamed at the ceiling. I want the insurance payout. We need his signature, she yelled, pointing down at me. Why isn't he confused? Why is he looking at me like that? She froze. The hallucination seemed to part for a split second, allowing a beam of terrible clarity to strike her. She looked at me. I was sitting still, hands folded, watching her with pity and judgment. I wasn't drooling. I wasn't rambling. Then she looked at her empty glass. Her eyes widened in horror. Recognition dawned. You, she whispered, her voice trembling. You switched it. She collapsed into her chair, sobbing and laughing at the same time. A guttural animal sound. The bridges will fall, she sang, rocking back and forth. London Bridge is falling down, falling down, falling down. She is unwell, Edward screamed, grabbing the microphone. Please, everyone, stay calm. A medical emergency. Clear the room. Security guards began to swarm the stage, a wall of black suits moving to silence the truth. She's not unwell, a voice cut through the chaos. Lucas stood up. He didn't stumble. He didn't slur. He buttoned his jacket with a sharp snap. He adjusted his cuffs. The drunken, defeated son was gone. In his place stood a man made of reinforced steel. He walked past his weeping wife. He walked past his terrified father-in-law. He walked to the microphone stand in the center of the stage. Lucas, what are you doing? Edward warned, stepping toward him. Get down. Help your wife. Lucas turned to Edward. He didn't shout. He didn't need to. Sit down, Edward, Lucas said. His voice was amplified by the speakers, booming off the vaulted ceiling. It was not the voice of the passive son-in-law. It was the voice of a man in charge. Edward froze. He looked at Lucas, then at the crowd, then at the security guards who were now unsure of who to obey. Lucas looked at me. We locked eyes. He nodded. Time to demo the building. He leaned into the mic, his hands gripping the metal stand. Wait for my speech, he whispered to the room, though the whisper was heard by 500 people. I am about to expose this entire family. He reached into his jacket pocket. My name is Lucas Miller, he began. Not Lucas Sterling, Lucas Miller. My name is Lucas Miller, he repeated. The name hung in the air, stripping away the Sterling branding he had worn for 3 years like an ill-fitting suit. He reached into the inner pocket of his tuxedo. The movement was slow, deliberate. He pulled out a thick manila envelope. It wasn't crisp or new. It was bent at the corners, worn from being carried against his chest for weeks. For 3 years I have lived in this house, Upper said to the stunned crowd. His voice was steady, but I could hear the undercurrent of sorrow. I have eaten at their table. I have slept under their roof. I have listened to them laugh about the people they've ruined. He held the envelope up. It looked small against the vastness of the ballroom, but it carried the weight of a wrecking ball. I have watched. I have listened. And I have recorded. He turned his head slightly toward the darkened AV booth at the back of the room, high above the crowd. He raised a hand. Now, he commanded. The massive LED screen behind the stage, which had been cycling through a looped animation of the Sterling logo, flickered. The gold letters dissolved into static. A low hum of confusion rippled through the guests. Edward stood frozen near the table, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on a dock. He looked at the screen, then at Lucas, realizing too late that the enemy wasn't at the gate. He was on the stage. The screen went black for a heartbeat. Then a video feed flickered to life. It was grainy, shot from a low angle, a hidden camera concealed in a bookshelf or a vase. The timestamp in the corner read October 14th, 11:42 p.m. 2 days ago, the audio hissed, then resolved into clarity. The video showed Edward and Jessica in their study. The room I was standing in now was just on the other side of that wall. In the video, they were drinking scotch. They looked relaxed, comfortable in their corruption. Video Jessica. If Michael doesn't sign, we're finished. The auditors are coming Monday. The shell companies won't hold up to a federal probe. Video Edward. He'll sign. He's old. He's tired. And if he hesitates... Edward paused on the screen, swirling his drink. The Edward on the stage watched his digital self with horror. Video Edward. Evans gave me the scopolamine blend. It's untraceable after 6 hours. The crowd gasped. It was a sharp, collective intake of breath that sucked the oxygen out of the room. Flashbulbs erupted like lightning, blinding and chaotic. Video Edward. Put it in his champagne, just a drop. He'll be incoherent in 10 minutes. We'll call it dementia. We'll have power of attorney by midnight. Video Jessica. And Lucas? He has a soft spot for the old man. Jessica on the screen laughed. A cruel, dismissive sound. Video Jessica. Lucas is weak. He's a follower. He'll do what he's told. He's just happy to be in the will. I looked at the real Lucas on stage. He was watching the screen, his face impassive, like stone. He was forcing himself to watch his wife call him weak. He was enduring the humiliation to expose the truth. Video Edward good. Once we have the Miller assets, we liquidate the machinery, fire the crew, and use the clean capital to plug the hole in the pension fund. Then we declare bankruptcy on the construction arm and walk away. Video Jessica. It's brilliant, Daddy. A clean break. We burn the old wood. The video cut to black. The silence in the ballroom was absolute. It was the silence of a structure that has just lost its load-bearing walls. The moment before the collapse, every eye turned to Edward. He was no longer the titan of industry. He was a conspirator to murder. He was a fraud. It's a fake? Edward shrieked, his voice cracking. Deep fake. AI. It's all fabricated. But his eyes betrayed him. They darted around the room, looking for a friendly face, finding only shock and disgust. I gave you a chance, Lucas said into the microphone. He looked down at Edward, not with anger, but with profound disappointment. I asked you to keep the crew. I asked you to treat my father with respect. I asked you to build something real. Lucas's voice cracked with emotion. But you couldn't do it. You don't know how to build. You are not builders. You are termites. You eat the house from the inside out. You traitor, Edward screamed. The facade snapped. The civilized mask fell away, revealing the violent, desperate animal underneath. Edward lunged. He didn't call for security. He didn't run. He attacked. He scrambled up the stairs to the stage, moving with the manic energy of a man who sees his life ending. He grabbed the heavy microphone stand, ripping it from Lucas's grip. He swung it like a club, aiming for his son-in-law's head. Lucas was stunned, backing away. He was an architect, not a fighter. But I was a builder. I didn't think. I didn't calculate. My body moved on instinct, honed by 40 years of catching falling tools and bracing sliding lumber. I moved. I intercepted Edward halfway up the stairs. I caught the microphone stand, mid-swing. The metal bit into my palm. But I didn't feel the pain. I wrenched it from his grip and tossed it aside. It clattered loudly across the stage. I shoved him back, hard. It was a shove powered by every missed Sunday dinner, every insult to my profession, every threat against my son. Edward stumbled, his expensive shoes slipping on the polished floor. He crashed backward into the head table, sending crystal and china smashing to the ground. I stepped over him, casting a shadow that swallowed him whole. You touch my son, I snarled, my voice low and rumbling like an idling diesel engine, and I will bury you under the foundation. And I poured deep. Edward scrambled back, crab-walking through the broken glass, cutting his hands. He looked up at the security guards lining the walls. Arrest them, he screamed, pointing a bloody finger at me. They're trespassing. They're assaulting me. Get them out. The guards stepped forward, hands on their belts. Bruno, the giant who had blocked my exit, took a step toward the stage. But then he stopped. He didn't look at me. He looked at the main double doors at the back of the room. Boom! The doors didn't open. They burst inward. Federal agents. Nobody move. The voice was amplified, authoritative. A dozen agents in navy blue FBI windbreakers stormed the room. They moved with a fluidity that made the private security look like amateurs. They fanned out, weapons drawn but low. Leading them, pointing directly at the stage, was Sarah Jenkins. She wasn't just catering. She had been the wire. She had been the inside woman. Edward Sterling, Jessica Sterling, Dr. Alan Evans. An agent shouted, reading from a warrant. You are under arrest. Corporate fraud, wire fraud, embezzlement, and conspiracy to commit murder. The room erupted into chaos. It was a stampede of the elite. Guests scrambled for the exits, dropping clutches and spilling drinks. Senator Vance tried to hide behind a velvet curtain, but 2 agents were already on him. Dr. Evans tried to run for the kitchen, but Bruno, realizing the ship was sinking, stepped in his way, crossing his massive arms. Evans bounced off him and into the arms of an agent. I watched as they hauled Edward to his feet. He was weeping now, screaming about his lawyers, about his rears, about his donations to the Police Benevolent Fund. Paramedics were swarming the table where Jessica sat. She was slumped over, drooling, muttering about the structural integrity of the sky. As they loaded her onto a stretcher, she looked up. Her eyes found Lucas. For a second, the madness cleared. She looked at the man she had married, the man she had planned to destroy. I made you, she screamed, straining it against the restraints. You were nothing. I gave you a name. Lucas stood on the edge of the stage, looking down at her. He looked sad. No, Lucas said softly. You just broke me. You stripped me down to the studs. He watched them wheel her away. But I fixed myself, he whispered. I rebuilt. The police dragged them away. The sirens outside were deafening now, a cacophony of justice. The ballroom began to empty, leaving behind the wreckage of a dynasty, broken glass, overturned chairs, the smell of fear and expensive perfume. Amidst the storm, Lucas stood still on the stage. He looked exhausted. He looked lonely. He looked like a building that had survived an earthquake but was covered in dust. I walked up the stairs. My legs felt heavy, the adrenaline fading, leaving behind the ache of age. But my heart felt light. I stood beside him. You knew, I said. All this time, you were playing the long game. I had to be sure, Dad, Lucas said. His voice trembled. He looked at his hands, the hands that had switched the glasses. If I moved too soon, they would have buried it. They owned the judges. They owned the cops. I needed undeniable proof. I had to get them on tape. I had to wait until they made their move. You drank from her glass, I said. The realization of the risk made my stomach turn. You risked your life. What if she had switched them back? What if the dose was lethal? I knew she wouldn't poison herself. Lucas gave a weak, tired smile. And I knew she was arrogant. She never looks at what she's holding. She only looks at what she wants. It was a calculated risk, he added. A stress test. You're a hell of a gambler, I said. I'm not a gambler, Dad, he said, looking me in the eye. I'm an engineer. I calculated the failure point. I pulled him into a hug. It wasn't a polite hug. It was a crushing embrace. I held him tighter than I had since he was a boy. Since the day his mother died, I held him to keep him from falling apart. He buried his face in my shoulder. I felt his frame shake. He wasn't the VP anymore. He was just my son. I thought I lost you, I whispered into his hair. You never lost me, Dad, he choked out. I was just working undercover. I was deep in the foundation. Well, I said, patting his back. Job's done. Let's go home. 6 months later, the seasons had turned. The cold, biting rain of that night on the coast had given way to a humid, golden summer. The fall of the Sterling Empire was not quiet. It was a controlled demolition that shook the state. The scandal was the lead story for weeks, a sordid tale of embezzlement, bribery, and attempted poisoning that made the society pages look like police blotters. Edward took a plea deal to avoid a public trial that would have humiliated him further. He was currently serving 20 years in a federal facility upstate. Jessica was in a private, secure psychiatric ward. The doctor said she had suffered a psychotic break induced by stress and chemical imbalance. I knew the truth. She had simply looked into the mirror and finally seen the monster staring back. The Sterling assets were seized. The glass house on the cliff was seized. It stood empty now, a monument to greed, slowly corroding in the salt air. I sat on the porch of my house. The silence that had once haunted these floorboards was gone. It had been replaced by the sounds of life. A lawnmower humming in the distance, the chirping of sparrows in the eaves, the wind rusting through the oak trees I had planted 30 years ago. I rocked slowly in my chair. The wood creaked, a familiar, comforting sound. In the driveway, the sun glinted off the chrome bumper of a truck. Not a Bentley, not a Maserati. It was the Miller & Sons Ford F-250. It was freshly washed, but the dents were still there. Each scratch told a story. A slipped pipe, a dropped hammer, a job finished. It wasn't just a vehicle, it was a tool, and it was no longer idle. The screen door squeaked open. Lucas walked out of the house. He looked different. The Italian suits were gone, donated to charity. He was wearing a pair of faded Levi's and a flannel shirt with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows. There was sawdust in his hair. His hands, once manicured and soft, were rough again. He had a bandage on his thumb from a slip with a chisel. He held 2 bottles of cold beer. Condensation dripping down the brown glass. Mail came, Lucas said, kicking the screen door shut with his heel. He handed me a bottle. The contract for the new municipal library came in. They signed it? I asked, taking the beer. Signed, sealed, and stamped. Lucas grinned. He sat down in the rocking chair next to me. They want us to break ground next month. It's a big job, Dad. Steel frame, reinforced concrete foundation, cantilevered reading sections. It's a lot of weight, I mused, picturing the load distribution. We'll need to double the rebar in the west wing. Already ahead of you, Lucas said. I redrew the specs this morning. We're going with number 6 bars on 6-inch centers. I looked at him. He wasn't just talking business. He was talking building. The passion was back in his voice. You know, I said, taking a long pull of the beer, you're a better actor than you are a builder. Lucas laughed. It was a real laugh, deep, throaty, uninhibited. It didn't sound like wind blowing through a hollow cave anymore. I don't know about that, he said, wiping foam from his lip. They kind of built a pretty good trap. The structural integrity of that deception held up under maximum load. That it did, I agreed. You held the weight of the world on your shoulders, son. I had to, he said quietly. If I had slipped, if I had let them see one crack. I know. We sat in silence for a moment, but it wasn't the heavy silence of part 1. It wasn't the silence of secrets and regrets. It was a companionable silence. The kind of silence 2 men share after a long day of hard work. The peace of a job well done. I watched the fireflies beginning to blink in the tall grass. Dad? Yeah? Lucas traced the label on his beer bottle. I'm sorry I missed Sunday dinners. I'm sorry I left you alone in this big house. I thought I was doing what I had to do to save us. But I almost lost us. I looked at the empty rocking chair on the other side of him. Martha's chair. You didn't leave me, Lucas, I said softly. You were just on a long job site. You were working. I missed Mom's recipes, he admitted. Jessica, she didn't cook. She had chefs. The food had no soul. We could make up for it, I said. How? Next Sunday, I said. Pot roast. Your mother's recipe. I'll teach you how to sear the beef properly. You can't rush it. Deal, Lucas said. I'll bring the wine, cheap wine. We clinked our bottles together, clink. The glass rang out, a dull, honest thud. It didn't sing like the crystal at the gala. It didn't sparkle. This was the sound of truth. It was the sound of family. I took a sip of my beer. It was a domestic lager. $5 for a 6-pack. It tasted of hops and corn and cold water. It tasted better than any vintage champagne Edward Sterling had ever poured. It tasted like freedom. We had faced the vipers in their nest. We had walked into the glass castle and thrown stones. And we had won. We hadn't won money. The lawsuit settlements took care of the legal fees, but we weren't rich. We were back to where we started. A truck, a bag of tools, and a reputation. But we had won something far more valuable. We had reclaimed our name. That mean, Sons, on the truck wasn't a lie anymore. It was a promise. Trust, I said aloud, watching the last sliver of sun dip below the horizon. What? Lucas asked. Concrete takes 28 days to reach full strength, I said. But trust takes a lifetime to cure. And once it's set, it's harder than stone. Lucas looked at me, his eyes reflecting the twilight. It won't crack again, Dad, he said. I know, I said. I leaned back, closing my eyes, listening to the solid, unyielding world around me. We have a library to build. Thanks for walking this journey with us all the way, with Michael and Lucas finally safe and the foundation restored. Was this the justice they deserved? Or do you think the Sterlings got off too easy? Let us know your thoughts in the comments.